The Custom Functions and My Menu is where we are going to get to really customize, personalize our camera, make some small tweaks to make the camera operate just the way that we are happy with. So let's go ahead and dive on in and see what we have. Starting on page 1, we have exposure level increments. This is where you can change the shutter speeds, for instance, from third stops to half stops. Most of the time, third stops are good because it's a nice small increment to work with, very subtle difference between the two. I have, for instance, a light meter that works in half stop increments, and if I wanted to match it up with that, I could switch it over to half stops. But for the most part, I think third stops is going to be good for most people. With the ISO speed, usually I like keeping things left in the third stops to be very accurate, but I know in the ISO settings, a lot of people just make real big notable jumps. So if you're always jumping from 100 to 1600 and you don't really stop on all these third stop increments, you can save some dial turning by just going to one stop so that you have the main full stops that you're going to. I could very easily live with that standard, but I sometimes like keeping those third stops. So I'm keeping the third stops for myself, but I think there's a good reason for doing the one step. Speed from metering in the ISO. This one is the first item in 70 cameras and all these menus, thousands of features that I have not been able to figure out. I've read the instruction menu dozens of times. I've read the info screen in here dozens of times. I can't get this thing to work. I'm not sure why you would want it to work, but the general idea here is that if you have the camera in auto ISO and it changes, and then the metering times out, do you want that new ISO setting locked in? And it doesn't really seem to matter to me because the camera's turned off at that point, and when you press the shutter release, the camera turns on and the auto ISO meter re-engages at that point, even though it says it's supposed to retain it. In any case, I can't figure it out. I don't know what it does, but here's what I will do. I am going to challenge any of you watching this. If you can figure it out, maybe you can tell me. Send me an email right through my website, easy to get a hold of. And if you are the first person that can clearly explain to me how this works, I will make an update video. I will congratulate you, and I will send you a copy of each of my books. And so if you're interested, these are for sale on my website on the shop page, but I would like to give them away to somebody who can explain how this feature works. And so you can't just give me some random bit of information. You got to really explain it to me. I challenge you to figure this out. And for everybody else right now, let's not worry about this feature. And hopefully there'll be a video that adds on to this class that I'll add in a little bit later. All right, bracketing auto cancel. This one's easy. So when you have your camera in the bracketing mode, are you wanting to do this on a regular basis or on a one-time basis? And so do you want to come back in and turn this on every time you need it? For those of you who are occasionally into bracketing, this is a good thing to have on. That way you shoot a bracket and then your camera's not stuck in a bracketing mode, which could be disastrous when it comes to your exposures. For those of you who are doing HDR photography, you're doing a lot of bracketing, you would want to put this on disable so that you don't have to keep coming in here and turning it on again repeatedly. All right, the bracketing sequence. Now this can be very important. If you are shooting bracketing and you're looking at all these thumbnails on your computer screen, it can get a little confusing as to where the bracketing started and where it ended. And so there's a couple of different options. The standard option, which I don't think is the most logical, starts with the 0 and then goes to the underexposure ones and then goes to the overexposure ones. And when you shoot several series and these series of images are backed up upon each other, it's a little hard to decide where did one begin and one end. And so a lot of photographers prefer the -0 plus option. So it goes from dark to lighter, but there is also a lighter to dark option for those who want something a little different. The number of bracketed shots traditionally has been 3 shots. You do have the choice of 2. I kind of like 5 shots when I'm working with a pretty wide dynamic range. And 7 shots can be good if you are shooting a very wide range and you're doing HDR photography, for instance. Safety shift. Now this one's kind of interesting because you're deciding whether you want the camera to change one of your settings, one of your manual settings, to save the exposure for you. From a more serious photographer standpoint, you do not want the camera changing anything you have manually set on the camera. However, for other people who maybe aren't as aware of every little setting that they're making an adjustment on, would like the camera to come in and save their skin, you might say, if they should make a mistake. And so let me give you an example of this. Let's say you're in the time value mode and you are setting shutter speeds. The camera is figuring out the aperture for you. You set a fast shutter speed, like 2,000th of a second. Your fast lens works out fine at 1.4. And then you decide, I want to shoot at 4,000th of a second. What should happen? Do you want the camera just to allow you to shoot at 4,000th of a second? And in this theoretical scenario, you would be about one stop underexposed image, which you might be satisfied with. Or you might be saying, wait a minute, I don't want to make a mistake here. Let's have the camera come in and safely shift me back down to where my limit is, which is 2,000th of a second. And so it would limit what you can do in the camera. And there are some cases where that might be handy to have that safety shift, but there is a better option now, which is safety shift with ISO. So, same scenario, you go up to a fast shutter speed, you go up one step beyond it, the ISO comes in to save the day. And that's usually not as big of an issue as changing the shutter speed or not limiting what shutter speed you can go to. So if you wanted to have the camera kind of save your butt, you could set it to ISO. I think that'd be a reasonable option. But for the more manual shooters who don't want the camera changing any of their features and they want to do whatever they want to do, no matter what the camera thinks, then you would just turn this feature off. All right, this is kind of the same topic with same exposure for new aperture. If there was a situation where you were shooting with a fast 1.4 lens and you take that lens off the camera and you mount on a f4 lens that has a maximum aperture of f4, most photographers are going to know that you're going to need to make some changes with your ISO and your shutter speeds to accommodate this new slower lens on there. You could have this set to ISO and the camera's ISO would automatically adjust and you would stay at the same shutter speed and you would just keep shooting and the camera would keep a proper exposure. Serious photographers will want to turn this off. People who want to have the camera kind of save them in this case could set it to ISO, or you could have the camera change shutter speeds or a combination of shutter speeds and ISO. And this can take effect when you go from a fast lens to a slow lens, when you add a teleconverter or an extension tube, or change a lens in some ways where there's a new lens that has a very different aperture that it can't work with. And so it's a pretty rare situation, but it will depend on whether you want that camera to step in and make a change on you. Next up is whether you want to have the meter lock after focusing in different metering modes. And so you can have it do in some modes, but not the other modes by checking or unchecking the appropriate boxes. Restricting the shooting modes. So this is for photographers who don't use some of the shooting modes. If you are a variety photographer that shoots a little bit of everything, leave all these checked on so that you have access to them. If you are doing something very particular, you're working in a studio, you work with a flash unit, and that is all you ever do, you do not need the bulb mode. You could come in here, turn off the bulb mode, so it's not even an option that you can make a mistake setting. And so here you can get rid of things that you do not normally use. And so if you don't like them, eliminate them and you won't have to see them ever again. Setting the shutter speed range. And so you can restrict the shutter speed range down to a particular number. Now, for most skilled photographers, you're not going to want to do this. If you were going to set the camera up for, say, somebody else to use or other people that you wanted to restrict what they could do with the camera, this would be a reason for it if you had it in a certain type of photo booth or studio where assistants might be operating the camera and you want to make sure that they stay within a very narrow range. You could force that on the camera. So you can do that with the shutter speed, and then you can do it here with the aperture. Most people are not going to want to touch this because you're going to want to have access to those all the time. All right, on to the third page, dial direction during time value and aperture value. This one I think is very important. And this is because the camera is not very intuitive the way it is straight out of the box. When turning the main dial of the camera and turning the other dials of the camera, the exposure indicator does exactly the opposite of the dial direction that you are turning. And I would like to prove this to you and show you how we can fix it. All right, let's turn our camera on. Let's go to the quick menu here so we can just see our light meter. All right, so let's get our light meter set to the middle of the range here. Now, if I turn this dial to the left, the indicator goes to the right. And if I turn the dial to the right, the indicator goes to the left. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Let's try it with the back dial. So if you turn this dial to the left, the indicator goes to the right. And if you turn it to the right, it goes to the left. However, if you turn the bottom of the dial, then it matches. But who turns the bottom of the dial? I don't know. Okay, let's fix this. Menu. We're going to dive over to page 3, dial direction during TV AV. We're going to reverse it right there. Now, dial goes to the left, indicator goes to the left, to the right, right and left. And so this is going to make things a little bit easier if you've ever wondered why whenever you just grab the camera and make a change, it always seems to be the wrong direction. It's not your fault. And I would really like to know if anyone knows, why did they program the camera like this? It makes no logical sense at all. Things should move in unison with the way you see them. And so that's how you fix it. And then it's right. All right, the control ring rotation can also be changed. And so if you are customizing this control ring to do a particular feature, you don't like the way it turns, you can easily change it right here. Okay, folks, this is the big one, customizing the buttons on the camera. This is where we get to really tailor the camera the way we want it to work. There is a lot of buttons spread all over the camera that we can reprogram into doing a multitude of different things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few handful of examples of things that I think would make sense for somebody somewhere. They may or may not be for me or for you, but I think they will enlighten you into the types of changes and the depths of the changes that you can make on the camera. So let's do our first change here, and I've got a few of these things set up for us. What we're going to change is we're going to change the multi-controller to make a little bit more sense. All right, so if we look at the back of the camera, I'm going to hit the info so we can see what's going on. I'm going to give us a little darker exposure just so that we can see the focusing point. Now, in order to move the focusing point, we have this wonderful joystick, but the joystick doesn't do anything until we press the focus select button, and then we can move it around. And so once that times out, we can't do anything with the focusing point, and we're going to fix that first. So we're going to go into our custom function, page 3, third item down, customize buttons, and we're going to look for this little joystick icon. We can look at the back of the camera, and it's somewhere down here. There it is, right there. It's currently turned off. Now this one doesn't have too many things it can do. We're going to go over here to this right. We're going to press set, press the shutter release to kick back out. Now we can press this dial anytime we want, hit the center, hit it straight in the middle, and it goes back to the middle. We don't have to press this button over here. We can, but we don't have to. We can just get this moving around. And so if you do move your focusing point around a lot, I think this makes a lot of sense, and it's something I think pretty much everyone is going to want to change. Most everyone, not everyone. All right, next up, we're going to take the light button and we're going to have that become our menu operation. So, as you know on the camera, the menu button is way over here on the left, and that's hard to get to. We want to make it easier to get to, so we're going to dive into the menu, customize buttons. We're going to look for the little light bulb symbol here, and it's somewhere down there. There we go. It currently activates the light bulb, which is fine, but what we want it to do is to activate the menu system. So we're going to come down and look for the menu, and there it is over here. We'll hit OK, hit the shutter release to back out of this. And now if we want to get into the menu, we don't have to travel all the way around over here. We can just come up here and hit the light button, and boom, we're back in the menu. And so quick and easy. I like that. So if you don't use a particular button and you want to access the menu a little bit more easily, that's the way you do it. All right, let's take a look at what we're going to do next. Next, we're going to reprogram the multi-function button, because remember that does like 5 different features, and maybe all those 5 aren't totally in sync with what you do on a regular basis. So on the back of the camera, first off, the multi-function button up here on the top, when you press this, you can cycle through these 5 different options. And so one of the options that I think is strange is flash exposure compensation. I agree, this is something that should be changed, but when you have a flash on the camera, this camera doesn't have a flash. So what we're going to do, we're going to dive into the menu, customize buttons. We're going to look for the multifunction button, which is right there. It is performing the dial function. And I like the dial function, just not the specifics of it. So we're going to go into the info detail set. And now you can see the items that we currently have in here have checkboxes. Let's say we don't change white balance that often. I'm going to hit set and uncheck that box. Flash exposure compensation, I'm going to uncheck that box. I don't have too many other options. I have exposure compensation. I have my focusing area, which I think is an important change that I like to be able to make. You could add metering, and I'm going to go with picture styles because sometimes I like to change the camera to black and white, and this would make it easier. So now I'm going to hit info for next. Now I get to choose where things go. So focusing mode here, this one's pretty important. I'm going to move that up to the 2nd position. And now I'm going to move the focusing area and have that right next to it. I want to keep those focusing controls together. So now I have exposure, and then I have focus, and then I have drive settings. That's the same as the way I have the class set up. You see that? That's kind of my priorities there. And then we got the picture modes where we can change the picture styles. And then we're going to hit info for OK and hit the shutter release to back out of that. So now when I hit the multifunction button, I've got my ISO, my focusing mode, my focusing areas, and I can dial through those. Then I got my drive mode, and then I got my picture mode. And so set those up as you think works for you. I think there's ways to improve it for a lot of us. So get in there and get that dial function, which I think is a good function for that multifunction button. And then get that tweaked out the way you want it. All right, next up, we're going to take the auto exposure lock button, and we're going to do a number of things with this, all right? So the first thing we're going to do with it is we're going to turn it into an eye detection AF button. So we've talked about back button focusing. What we're going to be setting up now is what might be called dual back button focusing. So let's go ahead and dive in and get this done. So customizing the buttons. So first off, I'm going to do a dual back button focus, which means I want to take off the focus on the shutter release. So we're going to go in here and take off the shutter release, the focusing with the shutter release, and the AF on button is performing autofocus, which is good. We're going to leave that. And this auto exposure lock, let's say you don't use this, let's have it do eye detection AF, which is right down here on the 2nd row over here at IAF. Okay, so now let's do some experimentation. Let's lighten up the scene here so we can see what's going on. So now I have a single point for focus, and if I press the AEL button, you can see how it automatically chooses that human face. Now I am curious, and I'm going rogue here, what happens if we change the focusing area to animal detect focus? So we're going to go down here to animals. So we can choose our focusing point. We can choose to focus on her or the focusing point, and boom, it does it. It automatically goes to the animal. So the wildlife photographer can just set this up for standard focusing and then immediately goes over to the animal or face detection focusing, depending on what you have there. So this is dual back button focusing, makes it very quick to have 2 different ways the camera is working. And that IAF is a great system for doing portrait photography. And so if you don't mind having your AF button over there a little bit, you can reprogram that. You could actually reverse these if you want. All right, we're going to reprogram the AEL button to do something different now. We're going to reprogram it to go from one shot to servo. So for people who go and want to switch that particular aspect of it, let's get back over into the custom functions and customize buttons. We're going to come down to the AEL button, which is the star button, and we're going to change it from the AF. We're going to go to the AEL function, or excuse me, the one shot to servo, and that's right next to it, so that's easy to get to. So on this particular mode, let's see if we can pull up a little bit more information. So we are currently, let's double check, let's put our cameras back in single. All right, so we're in one shot. And you can see it says one shot over here. All right. And when I press AF, it performs and locks in on that subject. Let's put a subject in front so we can prove this. We focus in on that subject. Tad too close. Focus in, and it stays locked there. Okay. So now when we press the star button, it's in servo AF, and what it's doing is it's switching us out from one shot to servo, and so we still have to hit the AF button to go back and forth. But now it's in servo, and if you said, nope, let's just put us back in one shot, we're in the one shot mode. In servo, and you can go back and forth. And so this switches what would normally take 1, 2, 3 button presses. And so by just pressing that one button, it saves you 2 button presses. All right, let's change this again. So we're doing a lot of dual back button focusing here. All right, so we're going to do metering and AF start. So we're going to have 2 back buttons that are going to be nearly identical at this point right now. So we're going to go back down, and we're going to change this to the AF right here. Now, if we just do this, these are going to work exactly the same, but we see we have info detail set down here. So if we hit this, we can go in and we can make some changes. And let's go ahead and hit set here. Let's change this to servo. So when we press this AEL button, it's actually going to focus and be in servo with us. AF method, let's have it change to a very wide area here. And we can even go into the characteristics and set it to a particular characteristic that is different than we would normally have set up. So now I have a single point of focus. Let's darken this so you can see this a little bit more clearly. We'll pull off some of this information. So now I have one focus point set, but when I come over here, it has servo. Oh, wait, you know what I forgot to do is I forgot to lock in my settings. I will do that from time to time. So what we wanted to do is I got to make these changes again, lock it in, info set, and I'm going to go back to menu, and we're going to hit the set button. And so now it should be set in there. So this is our single point focusing, and this is our wide point focusing. And it immediately goes from single and one shot to wide and continuous. And so I think that is a very valuable thing. All right, let's do one more. All right, so we're going to switch registered AF function. All right, I'll explain what this is when I get in there. All right, so we got to find the button, and now we got to look for this AF and the arrow, which is right there. Boom. All right, we're going to hit info detail set. Now we can come in here and we can choose the AF tracking method. Let's choose the really tall one, and now we can change the tracking sensitivity of this particular system. This might be for a sports photographer who is shooting 2 different types of sports or 2 different types of subjects all at the same time. And we'll hit menu to back out of this. We're going to hit set to confirm it. Won't make that mistake again. And so now we still have our single shot right in here with our AF on button. And when we press the AEL button, it's not working for some reason. Let's double check what's going on. It switches, info detail set. Should have all that set in there. Oh, we forgot to check the boxes. You got to check the boxes, John. All right, well, menu to back out of that. Lock it in there. Now we're locking. Now it goes to the vertical with that particular style of focusing. And so got to remember to check your boxes and enter things. I make that mistake myself. All right, let's do one more, and this is maybe the most complicated one. We're going to reprogram the AF point button, so we're going to have 3 buttons for focusing now, okay? And so we're going to do a register recall shooting function. Easy for me to say. Back into the custom buttons. Okay, so we're looking for the AF point button, which is right there. We're going to come in and we're going to do something called register recall, which is look like a camera with 2 little arrows, and there it is, boom, right there. So we want to set this, but we want to go into the info detail. All right, so now we have a lot of options that we can switch. So this is what's going to happen is When you press this button, the camera is going to change the way it does things, all right? I am going to set my camera up in what I like to call the Bigfoot mode. If I was wanting to get a picture of Bigfoot, how would I have the camera set up? I am tired of blurry pictures of Bigfoot, so I want to be able to set the shutter speed, and we're going to set a fast shutter speed so that we don't have blurry subjects. I don't think he moves faster than 1,000th of a second, so I'm going to say that's good. Auto ISO, because he's in dark, deep places in the forest. Metering mode, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to leave the exposure compensation there. I think that'll probably be fine. White balance, we all know Bigfoot only comes out on cloudy days, so I'm going to set that just for kicks. The AF method, well, clearly Bigfoot's a very tall creature, so we're going to set this focusing point for it. Tracking sensitivity, responsive. We want to get right on Bigfoot very quickly. Acceleration, and I don't know how fast Bigfoot accelerates. I'm going to say a little bit quicker than normal, okay? AF operation on, that's good. All right, so we're going to register, not the current settings. This would register everything in the camera. That would be a mistake because we've set everything up here in the menu. And so we're going to hit menu to back out of this because it's all set, I believe. All right, so we are set for this registered settings. So now, currently our camera, give a little bit of light here, is in back button focusing, one shot single. Okay, that works fine. And then we have this tall vertical point which it goes into servo. And I'm going to turn on some info here so you can see more about what's going on. And when I switch over here, it switches to time value mode. Remember, I switched this mode so that it goes to time value. So it switched the mode, switched the focusing system, it switched a lot of things. So you could actually have this camera set up for 3-button autofocus, 3-button back button, 3-button back button autofocus. Yeah, that sounds about right. So as you can see, there are a lot of adjustments that you can make. I encourage you to explore this. If you want to dive into the manual, this is my only manual reference in the class, pages 817 to 822, and that's going to tell you which items you can put to which buttons. It is not an infinite collection here, and so there are some things that you can only do to certain buttons. But hopefully this has given you a peek inside of how much you can customize the camera. But we're not done yet. We've got a little bit more to do in these next couple sections. All right, customizing the dials. You can customize the front dial, the mode dial, the back dial on the camera, as well as the control ring on the camera to perform a certain function. So if you don't like, which one you're using for shutter speeds and apertures, you can swap those out, and that's personal choice on that. Now, one of the interesting options that I did want to show you is that you can have the control ring only change when you are pressing halfway down on the shutter release. And I think this is kind of an interesting way to have a feature that's pretty quick to get to, but there's a little bit of a safety catch to make sure that you don't accidentally change it. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the quick control dial to changing the focusing points first on the back of the camera. This one we're going to work with on the back of the camera. And let's go ahead and dive into the menu, and we're going to change the dials, and we're going to come down here. Normally this is aperture value, which I think is quite valuable, but we could change this to change the focusing point. All right, and so let's turn off a little bit of this information so you can see. So rather than grabbing the little joystick up here, which is very accurate up and down, but if you really just knew you wanted to change something very quickly from left to right and you're fine with an area, so let's go ahead and maybe change, I've reprogrammed a lot of things in this camera. So I'm going to change this to the tall area. So now you can just change this real quickly from left to right. And so for somebody who quickly shoots somebody on the left and then somebody on the right, you can set that up very quickly and easily. And I think that's could be a huge help in certain types of photographic situations. All right, next up, we're going to change our control ring to change our selected AF points. And this could be good for people who change things quickly or who have buttons that they have reprogrammed. So we're going to go into the camera, customize dials, and we're going to change this control ring. And you'll see there's a little button down pressing. That's the option we want, but we want it to do it with our focusing points, which is right here. Okay, so now what happens when we want to change the focusing area of the image, what we do is, it doesn't do any good just to turn the ring, okay, because it's kind of locked out. You press halfway down on the shutter release and you can change through the different size options. And if you, let's see, if you're turning and you release, it locks it in. And so only when you're pressing halfway down does it activate that feature. And I think that is genius. I think that's a great way for having just a quick little control of something that you want to change. And as you saw in there, there's a whole bunch of different things you can put in there. This whole AF point area, that was just one thing. One of the areas that I think it's very valuable is the ISO. I like the ISO easy, but not too easy to adjust. So let's dive in and make this quick change. So in the customized dials, and we're going to go down to the control ring, hit the set button, and we want the pressing down with the ISO. Perfect, right there. Okay, so we are currently in a manual mode, and we'll bring up a little bit of information, not too much. So we can change our shutter speeds and our focusing point back here, but now when we press halfway down on the shutter release, we can change our ISOs. And so I think it's a very clever way of being able to make a quick change that's got just a little bit of a safety precaution from changing it too quickly. So there's a lot of options in there. This is not how I recommend you set your camera up in its entirety, especially the Bigfoot mode, but you can find use for it. So encourage you to take some time, pause the video, or at the end of this video, go through those options and really think about what would be of value to you and what's going to help you work easiest and fastest out in the field. All right, if you've been messing around like I have and you want to clear out everything in the camera, then you can go in here and clear out all those customized settings. We talked earlier about adding cropping information to images, and so this is going to work with the Canon software. And so if you are shooting raw images and you want to have this information added to the file so that you can see it when you get to Canon software, you can add that in. Remember, when you shoot raw images, it's not going to actually crop the image at all. For the audio that you record in the camera, there are a couple of different options with the quality of the sound that you get, and so you can choose to compress it a little bit further for a smaller file size. Remember, it only has a mono microphone, so it's probably not the most important of settings. The default erase. Okay, here's one of these other little nuanced things that I think is irritating, and thankfully they have a solution around it. When you press the garbage can button, what do you think most people want to do when they press the garbage can button? They want to get rid of an image. But the default selected option is cancel. And what you have to do is you have to turn the dial to say, yes, I do actually want it, and then you have to press set. And so every time you delete an image, you have to press 3 different things in order to delete it. And if you would like to shorten that step up, you can have it set to just the selected option. So let me show you real quickly on the camera. So let's go ahead and play back an image. And let's say we want to delete this image. What do we need to do? We need to press once, twice, 3 times. And then you got to keep doing that over and over again. So we're going to dive in here. We're going to come over to the default erase. You can have it select to choose just to erase the raw or just the JPEG or HEIF image. Kind of unusual settings for people in very particular setups, but I'm going to say the erase selected is a little bit better option. So now when I play back an image, and I want to keep that, let's say I want to get rid of this image here. You used to press 3 times. Now I press once, twice, gone. Once, twice, gone. So that has a little bit of a safety recall. I think just pressing the garbage can button and having it gone, thankfully, is not a choice there. You can't just do that. And so it's got one safety switch in this regard. And the question is do you want 2 safety switches? That's up to you. I like 1. All right, what do we have next? Release shutter without a lens. And so do you want to be able to have the shutter release fire when you don't have a lens on there? In most cases, you want to turn this off so that nothing accidentally gets in there and causes a problem with the shutter. The reason why you would want to turn it on is if you have something mounted to the lens mount where it's not communicating with the camera, like a telescope or extension tubes or a third-party lens that doesn't have any electronics in it. Then you would want to set this on enable so that you can actually shoot photos. There are some lenses that kind of extend and retract, and do you want to have them retract when you turn the power off? For safety reasons, it would be smart to turn this on. If you want to leave the camera exactly focused in a position and you just want to turn it off and then turn it back on without the lens readjusting focus, that would be a reason for turning it off. But for safety reasons, it's probably best that the lens gets retracted into itself so that it doesn't cause a problem when you detach it or mount it and put it in a camera bag or something of that information. There is IPTC information that you can add onto your camera using the Canon EOS utility. This could be of help for sports photographers, journalists that have assignments and they're working for a certain corporation and they want to add that information into the metadata so that wherever that file goes, that information follows the photo. And so something for particular people with particular needs, but you will need that Canon software in order to do it. All right, if you've been goofing around this entire video and you've made a lot of mistakes, well, you can clear out your custom functions here. And so you still actually need to go back in and clear out your customized buttons and dials. This does not clear that out. This clears a lot of the other settings that we've been talking about. So this is something that you may need to do, as I say, if you've been goofing around and you want to just reset all of the main settings in here. All right, the next tab, this is fairly a short one, but easy one. This is called My Menu, and this is where you get to decide the items that you want to see in the menu. The idea here, in my mind, is that there's a lot of direct control on the camera for a lot of the features that you're going to use most of the time. Hopefully, you're going to get your camera fully programmed so that all the buttons are exactly the way you want them that are useful for you out in the field. If there's a few little things that you need to kind of dig into the menu, there is the quick menu, and that's non-adjustable. That's just kind of the way it is, and it's got a lot of the main features that you would find in there. But for all the other items that you might have found in the menu system that you've discovered as we've gone through this part of the class, and you said, hey, that's a useful feature, I can't reprogram it to one of the buttons, or I don't have any buttons available, you can add it into My Menu, and then you can easily find it without having to go dig through the rest of the camera's menu for it. Now, this is pretty good because you can put, I think, about 7 different items in there, and then you can have different tabs of items. And so in some of my cameras, what I've done is I've kind of organized them in a particular way. All of my video custom functions are on one page, and all of my landscape settings are on another page, and all of my action ones are on another page, and then all my kind of utility and general things are on another page on that. So let's go ahead and dive into the My Menu and just kind of explore and look at what the options are in here. So we hit Menu, we dial over to the My Menu. By default at the beginning, it's really got nothing in there. So we're going to add things to My Menu. Okay, and so now we instantly have 2 pages. We have kind of our organization page, which is always going to be the last one, our setup page. And then we have our first page, and we're going to hit the configure, and we're going to select items to register. And let's just do kind of a generic setting. So image quality, yes, I would like that to be a part of it. What else? ISO speed settings, sometimes I go in and play with that one. And think about things that are not available in other places. Okay, so focus bracketing, that's kind of a nice one I like to use. Shutter mode, I'm going to adjust a little bit. Touch shutter, I will sometimes turn on and off. And I'm going to call that good for now. So I'm going to hit the menu button, and I can rename this tab. And so I can come in here, and this is where the touch screen works out real nice. And so I'm going to just put this, I'm just going to call this JG1 and call it OK. Now I am going to create a new tab. And so we're going to go in for items to, let's me back out here. And so now I can come over here and I can add my menu tab. So we're going to add another tab and we're going to configure this one. And we're going to select items to register. And I'm going to scroll down a whole bunch because I want to have some different items in here. And let's see, those are playback things. These are kind of in order that they are in the menu system here. So let's do some focusing things. So let's do our focusing mode and focusing guide. I like that. Lens electronic. And we'll do one more. Okay, so now we've got this new one, and we can rename this tab, and we'll go ahead and delete this, and this will become JG2, and hit OK, and OK. All right, so now when I hit the menu, I have two different tabs. I have JG1 up in the right-hand corner and JG2. And one of the things you can do over here on the third kind of setup tab is menu display from my menu. Okay, so that means that when you turn the camera off and you turn the camera back on and you press the menu, the first place you go is my menu, exactly where all your stuff is. And so you can also come in here and you can configure things. Let's go ahead and let's configure this one here. Let's sort the registered items. Okay, let's say we want to put the touch shutter up here and we want to take the ISO and we can bounce it down here. And so we're just hitting the set button and moving things around. Let's move the shutter mode up here and it's all set in there. We can hit menu to back out of that. So you can have several pages. You can have the exact items on the exact page you want in the exact order you want. And I forget how many pages. I think there's about 5 pages that you can do in here. So that's 35 different items. Between customized buttons, the quick menu, and my menu, you may never need to go into the full menu ever again. And I know that's going to make some of you very happy. So lots to customize on your camera. You may need to come back to this section and review it a little bit later because there was a lot of customization that at first you might think, I won't need that. And then after a while of shooting, you're shooting a different style, you get more advanced with the camera, you want to have a little bit more control, you start realizing how a new feature can help you out. And so that's why coming back to these sections from time to time are often good because you discover things again for the first time, it seems like. All right, so get your camera customized, and we've got just one more section to go.